Warning, the following video contains spoilers. If you don't want this episode spoiled for you, switch the video off now.
The Timeshift.
Okay, so the big question on everybody's lips is, did this episode of Doctor Who Tesla my patience? Look, if you think that joke's bad, then you should hear my joke about this week's villain, which is so, to be politically correct, we'll say questionable, that it might get me kicked off YouTube. And for the low cost of only 5 likes, I'll tell it next week. Yes, next week I could tell a potentially career-ending joke on YouTube for only 5 likes. That's all you need to do. 5 likes is all it takes. And whilst you're liking, be sure to favourite, subscribe, share the video, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do, because YouTube is an incredibly scary space for small content creators. Support your small local content creator today. It does them a power of good. This worked very well in my last My Hero Academia review, and I'm hoping it'll work just as well this week. For those of you playing along at home, I will tell the joke that I teased in that last video in the next My Hero Academia review video. With that all done, said, and out of the way, let us now actually get into the meat of the review itself. Okay, so I never thought I'd actually use this word to describe an episode of Doctor Who, but this week's episode of Doctor Who was lovely. It was really lovely. It was a no BS, charming little adventure which was fun, funny and educational. Everything a good episode of Doctor Who should be. Look, there is room for deeper, heavier, more thematic, educational, messagey stuff, but some weeks you just want the Doctor to arrive on a planet, save the day, and not lecture you about one thing or the other at the end of the episode. That's not to say there's not other things going on under the hood with this week's episode of Doctor Who, that there isn't some kind of deeper thematic edge to it, but, you know, again, some weeks you just want to see the Doctor save the day, and that's all you really want. You don't need to feel as though there's some kind of deeper thematic message that you need to understand in order to get something out of the episode itself. I'll be honest with you, I was worried towards the start of this episode when the Doctor was calling Nikola Tesla a big fat liar. At that point I was terrified that we're going to get a Nikola Tesla exposed kind of story. That we'd have some kind of story that would tell us that Nikola Tesla was secretly an arsehole and he wasn't the great man of science that we all thought he'd be, and it'd be some kind of great hero-destroying episode, or worse, he'd turn out to be an alien. Even towards the end of the episode, I was just expecting the Doctor to say, yep, there goes Nikola Tesla, the greatest genius this Earth has ever seen. It's just a shame that he's not from this planet. Thankfully, we didn't get that, and it just turned out that the aliens wanted him because he was a genius and it would help them build guns and make their spaceship a little less shitty. And I'm great with that, I'm fine with that. Just about every single problem I had with last week's episode was not a problem here, or it was simply not a factor of it at all. This was a wonderfully well-paced story that gave us time to understand our villain, understand our heroes, understand the stakes of what is going on, and gave everything time to breathe. There were great moments with just the Doctor and her companions letting things settle, letting the weight of everything going on settle. Yes, the villain was goofy and wacky, but at the end of the day, I'll take that for an episode which is ultimately about educating us as to who Nikola Tesla really is. This is an episode that still, even with all that said, does kind of still fit into the grander narrative this season. Still about the destruction of Gallifrey and, of course, the
Timeless child.
Though, unlike in the past, when we have references to the grand overarching mystery of the season, it's not quite as laboured. You don't see a computer screen with a timeless child on it, or you don't have some character randomly in the background shouting, "Timeless child!" or something along those lines, so, as we've had in the past with stuff like the Promised Land and the Hybrid and Bad Wolf and that kind of stuff. With the past few episodes or so, it's been a lot smaller scale than that. It's been with the line this week of "Have you seen a dead planet?" and the reaction that Jodie Whittaker's Doctor gave. And last week with Graham calling Jodie Whittaker's Doctor Mardy. It's these smaller little character moments which tell far more than the whole, "Oh, what's your name, Doctor? Doctor Who?" stuff that we've had in the past. It's telling a grander narrative through smaller interpersonal character moments, the kind of thing that Chris Chibnall is really, really good at. Yes, this wasn't an episode written by him, but still the point remains. And to be honest with you, I'd rather tell the overarching narrative of a season through smaller interpersonal character moments than just have someone shouting the mystery word of the season or in the background randomly in an episode set in Sherwood Forest, as is the quality of things we've had in the past. My greatest issues with this episode, however, still existed, and they were issues mostly to do with the editing. That weird camera flash that we end up having after Nikola Tesla made his speech felt as though it took something out of that moment. Like there should have been at least a couple beats of silence where we just let the greatness of that speech just settle down and for us all to really get him. But we didn't. We had the camera flash because the story has to keep going, we have to get to the story, Of course, also the view from the window of Nikola Tesla's device, the big thing that I forget the name of, the big device that they used to zap the aliens with at the end, that looked terrible. It looked very pixely, as though they just found a stock image on the internet and just pasted it onto a green screen. It looked crappy, it looked crummy, but in the grand scheme of things, I'll kind of take hokey looking effects of Doctor Who because they've never really been that good. Another positive thing I'll say is that the jokes were probably some of the best we've had in a very long time. The joke, AC/DC joke, that is brilliant. That is probably one of the greatest jokes in the history of Doctor Who, let alone the modern run where some of the jokes have been very, very hit and miss. Even during the Russell T Davies era, especially in the Russell T Davies era, good lord. I won't spend too long talking about performances. I'll just say that it was a strong performance all around for just about everybody. Yes, the companions again felt as though they weren't being fully utilised, but I think we got enough of what we needed from them. Even if they weren't diving about doing laser stuff and backflipping over exploding cars, they still were able to act in such a way which supported the overall arc of the story itself, even if that was just in the case of Ryan acting as an emotional crutch for the series specific companions. It really worked. Everybody did a fantastic performance. I forget the names of the guy that did Nikola Tesla, but he was fantastic and brilliant. And it's amazing seeing people trying to find fault in his performance. I mean, I know there's a lot of people that don't like Doctor Who and the direction it's taken, but at certain times it really does feel like clutching at straws, for goodness sake. Though with that said and done, we might as well at this point just dive headfirst into the overview and give you my overall feelings of this episode as a whole. Okay, so now the overview. What did I think about the episode as a whole? Now, I found a tweet which I think perfectly sums up my feelings about this week's episode of Doctor Who. I don't have the tweet to hand, but it went something like this. This week's episode of Doctor Who is a historical set episode. It's not as good as Rosa, but on a rainy afternoon, I'd rather rewatch this episode than rewatch Rosa. I think that's perfectly sums it up because this episode is a fun, high-spirited, charming little adventure that's not tied down by the baggage of a grander narrative or some kind of moral message that it feels it needs to tell more than it needs to tell a solid, coherent narrative. The performances in this week's episode are all of a level that they need to be to make this story really work and to make it pop and to make it memorable. I do feel, however, that it is lacking in the kind of emotional punch I think an episode like this needs. This is the thematic twin, the thematic equal of the Vincent van Gogh episode a few seasons ago. But I feel that if it had tried to do that kind of thing again, it would be unfairly compared to it, as I don't think it would have, in all due respect to the people that wrote this episode, be quite as good as it. I think it would only serve to devalue this particular episode in the long term. This is easily, by far, the best episode of this season and one of the best of the Chibnall era, and easily for me one of the best of the past decade, which yes is high praise, but sometimes all you need for an episode of Doctor Who to really work is an adventure in time and space. Nothing more, nothing less, and this is easily one of the best ones we've had in a very, very long time. Now before we go, we do actually have a comment I want to discuss from last week's Timeshift video, which comes from Ziggy, which says, "This story," that being Orphan 55, "gave me McCoy era vibes and not in a good way." And I have to say that I do agree with that statement quite well. That episode did have feelings and flashes to me of Paradise Towers, minus the weird quirkiness that made Paradise Towers work in a way. I don't think Paradise Towers is a great story, everything said and done, but it has a weird charm to it that makes it interesting. the gang that you've seen, that kind of reminds me of something out of Necromunda in a good way, and whilst I think that the original plans for that episode probably would have made for a better episode, it's mostly casting things I don't think worked with it, I still think it was a really solid one. With this one, however, it probably would have worked better had it been a multi-parter like Paradise Towers was. I mean, imagine cutting the Paradise Towers episode and just focusing it down into a single episode, and you would have ended up having the same problem that you had with Orphan 55. I mean, it feels like a very early era McCoy era episode if we're going to be really harsh on it, but you know, at the end of the day, I've said my piece on it. I think that it could have been and should have been a lot better than it was, but at the end of the day, what else could you really say about it otherwise I'd just get ranty and angry again. Next week's episode, we're back in modern day Earth. We're in Gloucestershire for reasons that I'm sure we'll find out. I have a sinking suspicion that the next week's episode is going to be a crappy one, but we'll soon see about that. But what about you, dear listener? What do you think about this week's episode of Doctor Who? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll get back to you shortly, either directly in the comments themselves or towards the end of next week's video. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Click the bell and do all that stuff, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. If this video gets to 5 likes, I'll tell my potentially career-ending joke about this week's villain in next week's video. 5 likes is all it'll take to tell a joke that, for want of a better word, might not be that PC. Yes, we're going there. Oh god, I really shouldn't hype this joke up, because at the end of the day it's probably going to be massive disappointment. But hey, we can say the same about modern Doctor Who, can't we? Hey! But anyway, thank you for listening, thank you, and goodbye.